Could the United Kingdom rejoin the European Union? The UK's decision to leave the EU was celebrated when the referendum results were announced. After all, this is what they wanted. In their words, to put Britain first. 4 years later, with Britain independent from the EU, people are desperate to find a way back into the coalition. The politicians who advocated for Brexit are taking a minute to rethink their decision. Did they act in Britain's best interest? There are people in the UK who couldn't be happier with Brexit, but their numbers have gone down. In light of the economic challenges that came as a part of leaving the single market, there are people who are wondering if maybe it still isn't too late. What if the UK could still go back? What if Brexit could be reversed? It wouldn't be easy, that's something we know for sure. But is it possible? Would the UK have to carry out yet another referendum? And could the EU simply say no? A lot of factors come into play when we're talking about reentry, and we'll go over each of them in today's video. David Cameron's premiership was many things, but smooth wouldn't be the word used to describe it. Cameron became one of the youngest prime ministers in Great Britain's history in 2010, at the age of 43. Immediately, however, he was tasked with resolving two pressing concerns: Scottish independence and, of course, the UK's membership in the EU. Cameron decided the best way to resolve both issues was by holding a referendum. Now, admittedly, Cameron had been lobbying for Scotland to remain a part of the United Kingdom and for the United Kingdom to remain a part of the European Union. His team had conducted ground surveys to determine that the results of the referendum would be in line with what Cameron had hoped for. It was a gamble, but it was one Cameron was willing to take. As all risks go, the chances of it working in the Prime Minister's favor or against it were split right down the middle. In 2014, 84.59% of registered voters in Scotland turned up for one of the largest voter turnouts in the UK's history. The ballots had a simple question: should Scotland become an independent country? Voters who wished to remain a part of the United Kingdom were directed to vote no, and those who wanted independence from the UK were directed to vote yes. It was a close call, but in the end, the votes were 55% to 45% in favor of staying in the UK. David Cameron released a statement saying that he was delighted with the outcome, and that it would have broken his heart to see the United Kingdom come to an end. While his gamble on Scottish independence might have paid off, it didn't when it came to Britain's membership in the EU. In 2016, a referendum was held in the UK to determine whether it should stay in the coalition. The question was, again, as straightforward as it could be. Should the United Kingdom remain a part of the European Union, or should it leave the European Union? Voters had the option of voting to either remain or leave. The margins for the 2016 referendum were even closer than those for the 2014 Scottish referendum. This time, the decision was split 51.89% to 48.11% in support of leaving the UK. So that's exactly what Cameron resolved to do, but not before resigning from the premiership because of his lack of foresight. But there's something you have to remember here. The 2016 referendum was held all throughout the United Kingdom, which meant that along with England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland were also asked to participate, and the results from each country differed. England is the most populous country in the UK, with 55.3 million people. Scotland comes in second, but by a large margin, 5.4 million. Then there's Wales and Northern Ireland with 3.1 and 1.9 million respectively. In a nutshell, even if every other member of the UK voted to remain, England held the decision in its hands. And that's more or less what actually happened. 53.3% of voters in England voted to leave, compared to 38% in Scotland. Yes, while there wasn't a huge margin between leave and remain voters in England, there was one in Scotland. The Scottish public voted in favor of staying in the EU, as did Northern Ireland with 55 votes to remain. Wales was split between 52% and 47% in favor of leaving. But what does this mean for Scotland? Did it matter what they had to say at all? The Scottish National Party, a left social democratic party, had governed Scotland since 2007. One of the many things on their agenda is to see Scotland become an independent nation. The 2014 election results didn't reflect their hopes for the country, and Alex Salmond, then the leader of the SNP, announced that he stood by what the Scottish people wanted. Another term that was popularized in 2016 along with Brexit was IndyRef 2, coined by the former First Minister of Scotland and once the leader of the Scottish National Party, Nicola Sturgeon. She noted the disparity in the results from the 2016 referendum. Was it fair for the people of Scotland who wished to remain in the EU that they were overpowered by the vast population of England? Sturgeon didn't think so, and neither did many members of the SNP who used the opportunity to call for a second referendum. They argued that the results of the 2016 vote on EU membership proved that the Scottish people had very little to no say in decisions made for the UK as a whole. England would always take the lead. They argued that the results, and then the subsequent announcement by Boris Johnson in 2020 that Brexit was indeed happening, proved that their voice didn't matter. It had given a chance for the Scottish public to reflect on their choice in 2014 and see things through a clearer lens. Sturgeon personally wrote letters to Boris Johnson asking for a second referendum, and the then Prime Minister of the UK replied in short and simple terms, no. In Johnson's own words, this was a once-in-a-lifetime vote. He also argued that the referendum directly preceding the 2014 one had occurred in 1975, meaning a 41-year gap between the two. Johnson laminated on the fact that the 41 years were adequate enough for the Scottish public to decide on whether staying in the UK was in their best interest, and in 2014, they believed it was. He also stated that the next referendum should only happen after another 41 years have passed. Sturgeon, however, says that those terms are unacceptable for Scotland and that Westminster is again trying to steamroll Edinburgh's decisions. The SNP plans on enacting Section 30, which would give Edinburgh a direct and final say on matters that pertain to Scotland and its sovereignty. For that, the SNP would need a majority, 65 seats in Parliament. It's also important to understand that Johnson's statements weren't too far off from what is considered typical when holding referendums. The earlier vote on whether the UK should stay or leave the EU happened in 1975, with an overwhelming majority voting on staying a part of the coalition. However, the EU is Sturgeon's talking point when calling for an earlier referendum. The Scottish people served to benefit from the EU and its single market. Their decision, however, was overrun by massively populated England. A resurgence for Scottish independence has caused panic in Westminster. Should they rejoin the EU to appease Scotland at the risk of a referendum that could see them exiting the UK instead? The Liberal Democrats, however, think that the situation would never come to enacting Section 30. Why? Because they have a step-by-step approach to how the UK can rejoin the EU without ruffling any feathers. Is it overambitious, or might it just work? For the Liberal Democrats, the only way to appease the Scots and work in the best interest of the people of the UK is by rejoining the EU. They've acknowledged that it's a long process, but stressed it being a necessary one. Ed Davey, the party leader, produced a stepwise approach to how the UK could carry out this plan in the most efficient way possible. The first phase is to restore relationships and rebuild sentiments that might have been affected by Brexit. The Liberal Democrats claim that the UK needs to start by repairing its relationship with EU countries who tried to lobby against Brexit. This includes diplomatic efforts with a particular focus on collaboration on key issues, such as security, immigration, and trade, demonstrating the UK as a reliable partner. The next phase is key: economic integration. This phase includes rejoining the European single market. The process, as Davey reflected, wouldn't be easy, and the UK would have to align itself with EU standards and work on their terms, all to ensure economic cooperation. This would also open the way for membership into the Customs Union, which seeks to eliminate tariffs and trade barriers between EU member nations. Political alignment, public engagement, and education would make up the next two phases, which include adherence to the EU standards for all member states, and advocating for them by educating the people of the UK on the significance of rejoining the EU at the grassroots level. The Liberal Democrats, however, recognize the possibility of the people of the UK refusing yet again to join the EU. Davey, however, is convinced that in light of the situation and shifts from 2020 to 2024, the people of the UK would at least be open to the idea of associate membership. That is, the UK would become a part of the EU and would receive some benefits, admittedly, a few short of those with full membership. Still, Davy's hopeful that eventually the masses would recognize the importance of rejoining the EU, and when the situation seems favorable, they would hold another referendum in the near future. In 2023, a survey revealed that 56% of survey respondents claimed that Brexit was the wrong decision, and only 31% still believed that it was in the best interest of the British. Liberal Democrats see this as proof that the tide turning in the economic situation of the UK showcased just how necessary the EU was for the UK. Now, we have a major party in the UK advocating strongly for re-entry into the coalition, and Scottish presence in the UK hanging on by a thread, as they see the 2016 referendum as an infringement on their rights. That being said, can the UK actually join the EU again? Better yet, would the EU be welcoming? Why did it take 4 years from the day of the referendum for the UK to officially leave the European Union? That's because leaving a major coalition such as the EU wasn't as straightforward as the Leave voters thought. That, plus the fact that the EU set up the UK Task Force, or the UKTF, a specialized team to manage Brexit negotiations. Formed in 2019 and led by Michel Barnier, the UKTF was responsible for negotiating the terms of the UK's withdrawal from the EU and shaping the future relationship between the two entities. It handled complex issues like trade, citizens' rights, and the Irish border. Speaking of Barnier, he revealed that while he could see that the UK was determined to leave, the door would always be open should the nation ever wish to rejoin the coalition. But that doesn't mean that the process would be a straightforward one. France, for example, has been at odds with the UK when it came to a key aspect of the EU, political integration. As it currently stands, the UK is one of 8 states wholly in Europe that's adopted a different currency set by the EU, the euro. The UK has traditionally stepped away from complete integration, something that the EU has advocated for. But besides that, there's another point that might hinder Britain's membership back into the EU. While no member of the EU will explicitly say it, Brexit showcased how the UK couldn't be trusted when it came to the sovereignty of the coalition. As one of the largest financial contributors to the EU, Britain's exit set back the EU's funding. Admittedly, the UK would have to prove that Brexit was a one-off event, and nothing of that sort would ever happen again. Can they prove that, though? The Liberal Democrats have made their position quite clear when it comes to rejoining the EU. However, other leading parties in the country still stand against it. To ensure re-entry into the EU, the coalition will have to determine that all major parties are in favor of staying in the EU, and there won't be any disharmony every few years when a new political party takes control. However, many commentators have claimed that the EU seeks to gain more if the UK were to rejoin. Besides its contribution as one of the largest economies in Europe with one of the best militaries, Brexit's reversal could be a cornerstone in the EU's cause. It would stand to prove to other outliers that joining the EU truly is in the best interest of states in Europe. On that note, does the UK actually want to rejoin the EU? Public opinion is divided and varies over time. Polls suggest a significant portion of the population regrets Brexit and expresses a desire to rejoin the EU, particularly among younger generations who predominantly voted to remain in the 2016 referendum. However, opinions are still split, with a substantial number of people either satisfied with Brexit or wary of the complexities and potential disruptions involved in rejoining. Nevertheless, the decision to rejoin would require broad public and political consensus, likely necessitating a referendum to gauge current public will accurately. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and while you're here, check out some of our other videos.